Hajime, welcome back to Comic-Jutsu. JT McRoberts here. Very happy to be joined by a special guest, Philip K. today.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, Philip. Welcome to the Comic Book Dojo, where we break down the skill technique and the storytelling technique used within a specific martial-oriented comic book. Today we have a very special comic book for you and I. I know we both encountered this very early on in our comic collecting career, and that is the first appearance of Iron Fist in Marvel Premiere number 15. And I was just looking at this today, and Marvel Premiere is actually a very odd publication because it started with issue 1 and 2 featuring Adam Warlock in his first series before it rolled over and became Warlock, and then Doctor Strange took over for like 12 issues, and then Iron Fist closed out the run. So it's a very bizarre run altogether.
So they ended on a high note.
Yes, well, they started on a high note and stayed strong all the way through. I mean, I don't know.
Iron Fist, is a high note.
Though I do think it's interesting that Iron Fist appears in Marvel Premiere number 15, and yet a year earlier, or actually a few months earlier, you had Shang-Chi make an appearance, or Shang-Chi, excuse me. I've learned how to say that we have to keep up with the MCU nowadays as they retcon everything we grew up with. Shang-Chi first appeared in Special Marvel Edition number 15 in 1973. So it was actually a couple months before. Marvel Premiere here has a cover date of May 1974, but as we know, with modern publishing, the books are usually released about 3 to 4 months ahead of time. So this probably came out around February of 74. And it was definitely at the crest of the Kung Fu craze in America and all across the world. Because I was looking at the timeline of a lot of pop culture and media at the time. And you definitely had a lot of the signature Kung Fu films, the Fighting Man films that as we came to know them. I don't know if they're Fighting Man, but just what we call Kung Fu films. What we saw in Black Belt Theater, the Five Fingers of Death, One Armed Boxer, all these movies were coming out around the 1972 time. Duel of the Iron Fist, which is responsible for the namesake of our character today, Iron Fist. Boxer from Shang Tsung. Because before this, most of those Chinese and Hong Kong films were actually all wuxia sword films. They were swordsman type films. And it wasn't until these films, which were actually inspired by the works of one Bruce Lee, and then the eventual release of Enter the Dragon there at the end of 1973, that kind of sparked this whole wave. And you see a lot of influences going into this. A little bit of Enter the Dragon, but a whole lot of Kung Fu, the TV series, with our one and only David Carradine. Here we have Kung Fu, the Book of Kane. This is one of the, I bought this off the shelf at Walden's Books, back when Walden's Books was still a thing, in the mid-90s when they released that, when they did that Legend Continues series, which was an absolute mess. But anyway, so this was released early in the Kung Fu cycle is the point I was trying to make, because from 74 on to like 78 and then cresting and rolling out to about 83, that's when we were inundated with that absolute deluge of Kung Fu films. You had all the great Lau Kar Lung films like 36 Chambers of Shaolin. You had that whole various cycles of Chong Che's films with T. Lung and David Jang. Here we'll show those guys. Quan Chen Tai, T. Lung, David Jang. All those guys.
Right before the great era. My favorite area in the era.
Yes, the Five Deadly Venoms, which we do not feature today, because this actually was released about 4 years before the Five Deadly Venoms. So that's what I'm saying. If Iron Fist had come out after the Five Deadly Venoms instead of after Enter the Dragon, how different would it have been? But I've got to say Bruce Lee is definitely a major influence on this because you can tell by the kicking techniques. Because one thing that we see in modern cinema is that high kicks and flashy kicks were not a thing in cinema until Bruce Lee, until we had Fist of Fury, until we had Chinese Connection, and he's the one that really brought all that stuff into prominence. But according to Chuck Norris, he's the one that taught Bruce high kicks. I don't know how much of that I believe. I'm sure he taught him his high kicks, but I'm sure that Bruce knew plenty of his own high kicks from his various studies and whatnot. But
I never heard that Chuck Norris said that.
Seriously, you never heard that?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, it's an actual clip on YouTube. You can find it where he says that. He says, "Yeah, Bruce only did low kicks, but I showed him you can high kick as well, Bruce." That's his way of explaining things.
Oh, thank you for showing me that. I never would have thought about kicking to that.
But I give Bruce credit for this because, one, because of the time, but two, I was looking at the grosses. The Chinese Connection, 100 million in 1972 worldwide gross. That is 600 million if adjusted for inflation. The dude's the biggest movie star ever. I mean, you think about that in 1972. Way of the Dragon, 130 million. Adjusted for inflation, 700 million. Enter the Dragon, 400 million. Adjusted for inflation, 2 billion. That's endgame numbers.
Basically, yeah.
It's crazy.
It was a phenomenon. That's why you see why we have Iron Fist.
Exactly.
It's own key.
So one of the challenges with Comic Book Dojo, Phil K, is that it's not that we want to debunk everything, okay? We don't want to debunk everything, but we want to say, okay, how do we make this work? How does this technique work? So in looking at this cover, I mean, he's in our first Comic Book Dojo, we talked about Captain America comics and Jack Kirby's boxing style, okay? And which are essentially all just punches and running spears and tackles and that kind of stuff. Here on this cover alone, you've got Fist is throwing two or three techniques here. So the idea is, okay, well, how does this work? So the layperson might look at this and just think he's just splaying out like the Karate Kid, okay? But anybody that's familiar with the fighting arts, you know that there's timing involved in this, So in terms of making this work, it's like, oh, well, he probably threw this front kick first. I don't know why this guy is collapsing forward, though, because it seems the opposite of whatever's going on here. But it's like he must have got hit with something else. But it seems like one of these dudes has been kicked, and then another one got back fisted, and then I guess half of these guys are just getting bowled over by the power of the Iron Fist there.
But it's just a dynamic shot to make you want to pick up that issue.
And it's Gil
One
Kane.
man, going against 5 with this dynamic fighter, and he's jumping. It looks like, you see the foot there, so he's actually in the air.
Yeah, that's actually, good call. That is actually, it looks like the patented David Carradine jump front kick from Kung Fu TV series. Like the only kick that you saw through that whole series was his slow motion front kick.
He's a great athlete.
Yes, he was. He's a great. Well, he is a good dancer. That's why he sold the Grace. We see Gil Kane in full bloom here, and in looking at this, I think honestly, aside from Neil Adams, nobody could have done this better than Gil Kane. I have to wonder if he wasn't a fan of these movies at the time, or if he was just maybe a fan of boxing and that sort of thing. Because all of his fight scenes are really dynamic and really, really believable. There's no, like, they're not back fisting with an open hand. I mean, there's no goofiness, no things that absolutely defy physics or anything. So when I talk in terms of making it work, it's like saying to yourself, okay, well, he's jumping in with this kick, and then he's coming with this this back fist, Iron Fist at power as he's coming down, that sort of thing, rather than just going out in every direction all at once. So here we flip it open, the Fury of the Iron Fist. Now, this is one of the few times where I'll say, okay, well, they never really quite pinned down the lineage of the Kunlun style in this timeline. Now, in this particular issue, it's like it's not presented as Kung Fu, and it's not presented as karate, but in looking at it, I actually got a bit of a karate vibe from this particular page in particular because of the stance. I mean, the way these guys are holding their hands and whatnot.
Well, he's holding his fist here.
Mm-hmm.
It's very karate style punching, when you reverse punch.
Yeah, exactly. He's got his hand chambered for the reverse punch. And the stance itself looks almost like the classic karate front stance, or the Zenkutsu Dachi, as we like to call it. That's what Sensei Segal would say anyway. The long stance developed by the great Funakoshi, Gichim Funakoshi. So anyway, so great little opening montage here, and again, it's all just brilliant storytelling from Gil Kane.
One against the many.
Yes. And off the bat, I do want to say, you know what? You know who probably has the most underrated run as an editor-in-chief at Marvel? Roy Thomas. This is a Roy Thomas book.
Okay.
Roy Thomas also brought in Conan the Barbarian. He was responsible for a lot of that early era experimentation right before. I think there were a few other revolving editors between he and Jim Shooter, which is why Shooter came in and took over, because after Roy Thomas there was like a quick succession. But he's the one responsible for this, and Roy is the one responsible for putting the words on the page. And at one point, he may craft his best piece of purple prose rather. Okay, so here we go. You've got Fist squaring off with the nameless Kunlun minions. Again, keeping this stance. I mean, just having knowledge of a basic stance like this alone shows that Gil Kane must have known something. And you think about this timeline, and there actually were, karate demonstrations. I mean, all the way as early as like the mid-'60s on up. And then there were a few scattered documentaries, here and there, like Fighting Black Kings or Kings of the Square Ring, some things like that. Like Kings of the Square Ring actually wound up documenting the crossover fight between Muhammad Ali and Antonio Inoki. So that was a few years later. But anyway, so that was one thing I was not expecting, was actually to see what I think feels like more of a karate influence in all of these early Iron Fist fights. And here again, you've got the timing. Now, you're always looking for a visual flow across the page, both as an artist, creating your story and your sequence, in that you want to lead your reader across the page by the arrangement of the shapes. So there's a lot of room to play and create timing in these panels. So this is almost like a Frank Miller, 4 long horizontal panels with the action flowing back and forth across it. And here, because you have Fist throwing like 3 or 4 techniques again. Here we've got the front kick to the solar plexus, and then he's got like what looks like a palm thrust over here, and then a backhand chop. So the layperson looking at this might say, both of these are just chops, but no, this one really looks like a palm strike, and this one has the action lines behind it to make it look like a chop. So again, this is Gil Kane, putting some sort of knowledge of the martial here on the page, and of course his dynamic design and the way it just flows across the page, because these fight scenes have to work. This is the first time anybody is seeing this Iron Fist character. He's supposed to be a martial artist. This is the height of the Kung Fu craze. This is, they're making this. They just came out of the theater watching Enter the Dragon, most likely, and like, oh man, we need to capitalize on this. We just did Shang-Chi. Now let's do a cracker that knows Kung Fu too.
Sorry, a white gentleman who knows Kung
Fu. Apologies to any crackers that may be watching this video. So variety of technique here, but what I like is that the technique kind of draws you back and forth, because you're going to notice the kick first and then one of these palm strikes. So the panels are great because you can actually spend a little time within the panel saying, okay, now he's turning with the elbow strike here and then jabbing off on this guy, and then boom, jumps up to finish this guy off. Yeah, with either a front kick or a round kick. But yeah, the way his head goes back, it looks like he's hitting him with the bottom of his foot to knock his head back that way. And continue on to the next page. Guy jumps at him from behind. Again, we have a nice little throw here. If we take a look at our judo textbook, this is similar to the classic ukigoshi hip throw. Here you see the setup where this particular attacker has the jump on Iron Fist's back, and then you see the result of him being thrown overhead. Something to that effect. He dispatches these guys. Another jump kick. These jump kicks are pure Bruce Lee. I mean, could you imagine never having seen these jump kicks before, and then all of a sudden you're seeing this Bruce Lee guy just make sporadic appearances through the 60s, because he did Green Hornet in 66, and then he started making his way into films. He's in a Marlowe film, which is where he walks in and he does this jump front kick where he's kicking straight up. I guess it's a front kick and breaking the light overhead,
Classic.
And then, of course, the stuff like Fist of Fury or Chinese Connection that have his classic jump kicks in them, or the Chinese Connection literally ends with a jump kick. And again, that's just one of his major contributions, along with just the verisimilitude of his type of combat that was presented. Actually, I didn't have a good magazine with his jump kicks, because when you talk technique, like, jump kicks are not your number one go-to. You might see them pop up every now and then in MMA, but it's like self-defense day number one. Okay, flying front kick. That's not...
You're not kicking someone off a horse, are you?
Yeah, exactly. You're not kicking someone off a horse, which is why it's important to understand where those techniques came from and why they were developed and what they were developed for. Now here you have Roy Thomas jumping in with a little bit of his purple prose, and I like the wording of this stuff where they call the hooded one the august personage of Jade, that kind of thing. And he talks about I have faced the challenge of the many and I have prevailed, meaning he fought this group of men. I stand ready now to meet the challenge of the one, which I thought was just nice, colorful wording. But with this naming, this UT, you could tell that Roy Thomas is watching the Kung Fu series, right, and kind of, coming up with something phonetically similar to what he's hearing on there. And this sequence right here, where he actually talks about the challenge of the many and the challenge of the one, it actually reminds me of a specific episode entitled "The Demon God" from season 3 of Kung Fu. It's actually one of my favorite episodes. It starts with Kwai Chang, and he's climbing up a mountainside, and he puts his hand on a scorpion, and the scorpion stings him, and he falls in a rock slide and winds up going into this cave, and he falls into a coma. And during the coma, he flashes back to his childhood at the Shaolin Temple, and he had an encounter with a young prince who wants to know about death, so he poisons Kwai Chang. And the prince explains to him, he says, well, you are one of the many. You're not one of the select. You're not one of the few. I'm one of the few, one of the select. Mm-hmm. So this is why I can kill you. And I want you to tell me about death as it happens. It's a really cool episode. And as is happening, the adult Kwai Chang is laying in this cave, and he's like hallucinating and stuff. And he actually meets an Aztec god, which now would look like Namor, believe it or not, which is pretty cool. And this priestess is like, praise Adel, give yourself unto Adel, and you'll have all that you want. It's a really, really neat episode. And of course, Kwai Chang doesn't want to give up, and he winds up.
It's Namor. But also in this one, you also see, if you people who watch Batman Begins, how Batman is going to the mountain, climbing the mountain, finding, and this is a very similar, story in terms of people will be familiar with, I guess, Danny. Family, father trying to return to Kunlun, climbing the mountain, trying to find the hidden secret society of martial artists.
And this format of going right into the flashback of the younger man's experience, I mean, that's pure Kung Fu TV series, because every single episode was like that. And that's what made it so cool. Was finding those parallels between what younger Kane was experiencing along with the older Kane.
Kind of classic story. History repeating itself, or will it repeat itself? You know?
Now, I marked this page because I've never seen one of these in real life, but I was just thinking, like, what are these Marvel Solid Bronze Collector's medallion coins? I was like, which kids actually bought these, and do they still have them, and how much are they worth? So I looked it up online, and all I could find was a Spider-Man one, but it was going for $303.99. So, kids, if you have, if your grandkids have your collector's coins somewhere, that's a couple easy thou. You can get some of that long money for cashing those in now. And yeah, there's something almost archetypal about this story. I mean, it's practically a mirror of the Doctor Strange story. You know, he goes off to Tibet or whatever, you know, the hidden city.
Far East.
Yeah.
To learn the secrets, techniques, magic compared to martial arts, or Iron Fist kind of fuses it, and so did Doctor Strange.
Yeah, exactly. But all just great storytelling from Gil Kane. I mean, he really has to get this particular issue and character introduction just off to a running start, which he does. Now, this is interesting here on this page. I remember seeing these in the comics back in the day, and I was just like, okay, well, everybody knows what karate is. That's up there real big. And you know what kung fu is, but then I was like, what are these other words? Judo, jiu-jitsu, save-eight? What is that? I had no idea, you know, and so this was really some of my first experience to just knowing that these styles, you know, potentially existed, you know. Now, before we started, Phil K was giving me hell over the spelling of jutsu because I went with jutsu rather than jitsu, but that's how we roll on Comic-Jutsu. And again, Gil Kane, he could just draw everything. I mean, the kid actually looks like a kid, right. You know, not like John Byrne with just a man's head on a smaller body.
Softer features and everything.
But it's just good storytelling. And even here, okay, so you're looking up, so you're having this you're being fed powerful emotion looking up at these guys. And then you get their point of view looking up at Meachum here. So he's like in this position of power over them. So there's like a lot of storytelling going on from this. You know, they could have shown it with them on the same plane, you know, and it wouldn't have had the same effect. But here, you know, you're almost in their eyes where he's looking up, where they're looking up at him and he's looking down with power over them. But yeah, this is just classic Kung Fu, the TV series formatting where you have that little flashback to young Kwai Chang Caine in the Shaolin Temple, and here it's young Danny at the gates of Kunlun, and then you flash forward to the Fist, who is now ready. Now, you had a lot to say about this particular.
Well, this was the very first appearance, so they hadn't done everything in terms of the origin. Oh, they hadn't done everything in terms of the origin. So, I mean, you know, in this story, Danny already has the Iron Fist, so he already faced the dragon. So you would think the dragon will be the ultimate test. But then he has the challenge of the many after he becomes Iron Fist. You know, he defeats the dragon and then the one. And so before they do the reveal, we'll let the reveal come out. But you can see how he faces this hulking type martial artist in a mask and intimidating in a full mask, and Danny has to fight him. And you can see in the beginning, he's quicker. You also see, you know, the palm strike here. Yeah. You also, you know, doing the
drop kick.
Yeah, I know, basically.
That's wrestling right there.
But also gymnastics, basically, showing like a pommel horse kind of technique.
Exactly.
But, you know, it's kind of futile as he gets. The hulking creature is very powerful. Gets the shot, boom, knocks him against the wall.
We see this a lot on Comic-Jutsu when you get into superhuman capabilities. You see a lot of back fists. It's like they're outside of this one reverse punch. This golem. Well, we don't know exactly what he is now, but we later find out he's a construct. You know, outside of this one reverse punch, he doesn't seem to have any technique.
Right.
And you see the more powerful a character is, like the more these back fists that they'll throw because it's such an arm punch. But I'm glad that you brought that up because that was one of the things I wanted to say was, do you think they even knew about the dragon at this point? Because this is issue 1. They don't hint at it.
Nope.
Nothing. They just tell this story. And then, boom, the next issue, you've got a different writer. You've got a different artist. And you have a whole nother wrinkle added into the Iron Fist mythos, which we see here in our collection of the Marvel Masterworks. So we'll have to come back and revisit this next issue and see how they plug in together after we finish this first one. And though I do want to point out one interesting thing, because it's always interesting to see the same names pop up over and over again, okay, when we do these. Larry Hama as the penciler, a guy that we know has military training, martial arts experience, that brought the ninja aesthetic into G.I. Joe. I mean, so another huge major influence. And this is 8 years before it, So yeah, so you've got this guy, which is a golem of some sort, which if you're not a D&D nerd, that's like a magical construct. Because I remember the first time I was reading this and we get to this part coming up, I was like, what the hell? Oh, well, I don't want to jump too far ahead. We'll what the hell it in. But yeah, you can just see that this thing is powerful and just knocking Danny all over the place. Even though he has the skills, he doesn't seem to be able to hurt it. And all of the action is just 100% believable. Everything has weight. It flows back and forth across the page. And I always like the mystery of these hooded guys just watching. It's almost like something out of The Prisoner. Right. Where you've got these hooded, mysterious, shadowy overlords that are watching over everything.
You could tell in this top frame how they're kind of doubting him, like whether or not Danny will pass the test as he's being pummeled. And his strikes aren't being as effective against, the hulking figure. So they're doubting whether or not he will succeed.
And that's really like the recurring theme of Iron Fist. It's like everybody doubts Danny. Now Danny doubts Danny. Right. Now Danny doubts the Iron Fist. Now Danny's not the Iron Fist. The end. Kind of how they did him. Right here, this is a missing Mighty Marvel value stamp. You can see the corner of the stamp right there. I think you cut these out and mailed them in for something. So that's what happened to my copy there. But God, this thing is just saturated with ads. Nowadays it would just be ads for check out the new version of the New Mutants and Cable's coming back and now the X-Men are all friends. But these are ads from everything and everywhere. I used to look through these things and I'm like, is this stuff real? Are these really X-ray glasses? I mean, do these work? And here we flash back again to fill in the gaps of what happens to Danny and his mother. And I'll tell you, this may have been an influence, and it may not. It might just be parallel storytelling. But this sequence where they actually find the gates of Kunlun, it reminds me of the middle part of The Man Who Would Be King when they discover the gates of the place that they're going to. I can't think of the name of it now. I won't call it Commertage, but I know that's not it.
I think I've seen it. So.
Doctor Strange. Oh, you should check it out. It's great. It's a movie about based on a story by Kipling, but it has a lot of Illuminati symbolism and like secret messages in it. So if anybody is interested in Illuminati craziness, you have to watch The Man Who Would Be King. It supposedly outlines their entire plan for colonialism.
But you also get to know that, it's a martial arts, or it's a superhero comic, so it has to be steeped in tragedy. Like we saw earlier, the father being cut away and dying, and then the wolves come.
You have to make your character sympathetic somehow. Right. So it's like he can't just walk there and say, I'm here to train. He has to.
And you got to see what fuels Danny Rand.
Mm-hmm. Which is what makes it great storytelling. And Gil Kane and Roy Thomas just had like a 5-minute chat about this. And then Gil Kane sat down and worked this whole thing out. But anyway, in The Man Who Would Be King. So they've been in the snowy mountains so long that they're snowblind. That Sean Connery's character is snowblind and only Peachy can see, okay? Who's played by Michael Caine, two great actors. Again, why it's so great. And they see these giant silhouettes framed in through the snow. Okay, and it looks like these like 15-foot tall warriors, and he's like, "Oh, I see what looks like guards." And he says, "Well, give them a round, Peachy." So he gets his rifle out, and bang! And they're like these metal. They're just these metal plates that were stood up like scarecrows to scare people off. And then they find the way beyond past that. So it was a really neat sequence. Not to go off into a tangent on The Man Who Would Be King, but that particular sequence is very similar, where they're also finding a hidden city.
And so on this page, you see Danny's mother, who basically sacrifices herself to save her son against the wolves.
Yeah. Great tragedy. Did they ever bring her back, or did they leave her dead?
They left her dead.
Okay. That's one they haven't defiled.
They brought the father back and kind of melded him with the golem.
Oh, really? Okay. I haven't read all of the recent stuff. Here's the first little in-house Marvel ad that we see for Deadly Hands of Kung Fu. With the Neil Adams cover, looks like. Yep. Doing a Bruce Lee riff. The jump kick there that we were talking about. And here we go, building up to what is perhaps Roy Thomas's single best written line ever. You know it's good because they continue to use it, right? Okay, so yeah, this is what I'm talking about. I was like, what the fuck? What has he got shooting out of his hand? And then you look in the next frame and it's this dagger that flies out of his hand. And that's when you realize he's a golem.
When you first see it, you almost think it's like a mist or something, and then it'll put you to sleep.
Exactly, it does. It looks like gas at first, so you have to see the other panel. And now when I was rereading this, it actually says that Iron Fist sees this visage of his mom, and it inspires him. It's not that he's just thinking it, but it's like all of a sudden he sees her. He's like, oh, I have to keep fighting.
I must keep going.
But this is classic visual storytelling where you actually see what they're thinking and feeling.
And eventually becomes Wolverine with the berserker rage.
He's been pushed too far. Again, a recurring theme for Iron Fist. Remember they had that whole probably 12-issue run where he went to Iron Fist Red, and he'd go on those rages. He'd have his fist rages. Comes in with the jump kick, elbow for power. Another nice Bruce Lee kick to knock he doesn't knock the head off yet, but just to knock it back. Which again, I mean, against a taller opponent, jump, hit him in the head. And right here, until it becomes like unto a thing of iron. That's Roy Thomas earned every paycheck right there. And they still use that.
Yeah, sure do. Like unto a thing.
Just that is his best moment of purple prose. So Roy Thomas, big salute to you, my man.
So it almost seems as though, like, if you look at it, since he already had to face the dragon and become the Iron Fist. Then he has to fight the many, and then he has to fight the one. So it's almost like tradition versus technology. And so Kung Lung is really it's not technology in Kung Lung. It's all mysticism and ancient society. And to become the Iron Fist, to really become the Iron Fist, you have to defeat technology.
That makes sense, but I think you're injecting that into it because that whole metaphor just falls apart. This is the only technological thing we see in all of this. Yeah.
That's right. That's the last thing. So to be Iron Fist, you got to be able, and some of the Iron Fists will get killed and wouldn't pass the golem or beat the robot.
But that's a good reading of that. That's definitely a good reading of that.
So if you cannot defeat the modern era of technology, you can't be the Iron Fist. If your abilities and mysticism and the ancient techniques of the traditional world.
I love just the building of psychic energy here, where Danny completely dominates the top of the page, dominates the frame. You see the energy building.
Look how powerful that looks.
Yeah, and it just rockets across the page, and good lettering here with the sound effects. Clump. Good sound effects, and then the whir 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 to give the idea of the destroyed robot, with its gears still winding and whatnot. Yeah, so that's what's so fascinating about it is we look at this first issue, even though it gives us a lot with the Iron Fist origin, it actually doesn't give us everything, and it probably leaves out 75% of the mythology that would be stacked on over successive issues of Marvel Premiere.
Or the reason for the tattoo, we don't get any idea of it. Not really. You know what I mean? So
yeah, that at this point they were probably just thinking like, Kane has those tattoos on his forearms, So they're like, well, let's give Iron Fist a tattoo. Let's put it on his chest so it's not on his arms.
Well, we know it's not a tattoo. It's a brand. So, it's a brand television show. It's not a tattoo.
Yeah. That's right. Calm down there in the comments. Okay. But it's interesting how you see how these stories can kind of get assembled piecemeal, by the Marvel House of Ideas back when they had ideas.
So you almost felt like it was almost more of a karate style that Danny was fighting, and more so than a kung fu with the stances and a lot of lunge punching. Reverse punching, a lot of straight line technique, even though it's dynamic in different directions, but it's very much more karate, more so than kung fu.
Very much so.
And no weapon work. Because he is
That's true.
The living weapon, or will become the living weapon.
Living weapon. Yeah, I don't think they call him the living weapon in this one, but that must get tacked on later. So, all right, so there you go. The styles of Iron Fist and Danny Rand. So thanks for watching, guys. Where can people find you, Phil K?
All over the internet.
All right. Look for him there. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And, of course, you can find the links below this video. Mate!